I'm review my RV, and every week we're throwing open the doors to the newest, most jaw-dropping motorhomes before they even hit the dealership lot. If it's fresh, innovative, and rev-ready, we're reviewing it. Let's dive in. They laughed at his wedding. But when the truth came out, they cried instead. Never judge a person by what you see. Because sometimes, the most beautiful souls wear the simplest suits. The air inside street, Mary's church shimmered with light, bouncing off chandeliers that hung like floating stars. Rows of white roses lined the aisle, their scent sweet and calming, though nothing could calm the whispers that floated from pew to pew. Guests arrived in elegant clothes, silk gowns, polished shoes, crisp tuxedos, all wearing smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. It was supposed to be a day of love, but for many, it was a day of judgment. At the altar stood David, tall, poised, his navy blue suit neatly pressed, his boutonniere fresh. But his hands, though calm in appearance, trembled slightly behind his back. He had never felt this many eyes on him, and though most were smiling, he could feel their quiet disbelief. The whispers were cutting, though hushed. He had heard it all before. For years, he'd been underestimated, dismissed, and pitied. But today wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about standing beside the woman who saw past everything others couldn't. Isabella, radiant in her white gown, stood at the back of the church. The light from the stained glass windows painted soft colors on her face. Her father, Mr. Henderson, stood beside her, his expression unreadable. He had agreed to the marriage, yes, but acceptance was still far away. The music began, the doors opened wide, every head turned as Isabella stepped forward, each step slow, graceful, certain. The whispers grew silent, then melted into quiet awe. She was stunning, and in that moment, even the harshest critics had to admit, she looked completely, beautifully in love. When she reached the altar, her eyes locked with David's. His breath caught, everything around him disappeared. The flowers, the murmurs, the faces. It was just her. The priest, Father Thomas, smiled warmly. He had married hundreds of couples before, but there was something different about this one. Something in David's eyes, humility, depth, pain, something the world rarely saw. Dearly beloved, Father Thomas began, we are gathered here today to celebrate love, a love that has already faced trials but still stands strong. A few chuckles came from the back, quiet but cruel. David heard them. He didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened. As the ceremony went on, Father Thomas invited them to exchange vows. Isabella's voice trembled slightly but held steady. From the moment I met you, David, I knew you were different. You didn't speak much, you listened. You didn't promise things, you proved them. You showed me that love doesn't need riches to be rich. You gave me peace, kindness, and faith. I vow to walk with you, no matter what tomorrow brings. Tears glimmered in her eyes. The guests smiled softly, some genuinely moved. Then came David's turn. His voice was calm, deep, and full of truth. Isabella, when you walked into that small garage 2 years ago, I thought you were lost. You asked me to fix your car, but what I didn't know then was, you'd end up fixing my heart. You saw value in me when I couldn't see it myself. And today, I promise to be the man you already believe I am. A murmur of emotion swept through the church. But just as Father Thomas prepared to proceed, a man from the bride's side, one of her father's business partners, whispered loudly. The crowd chuckled nervously. David froze, the words slicing deep. For a second, doubt flickered in his eyes. But Isabella squeezed his hand, hard, and he steadied himself again. Father Thomas noticed. He gently raised a hand, silencing the crowd. He looked around slowly, his gaze firm but compassionate. Before I pronounce them husband and wife, he said, his voice echoing softly through the hall, there's something you all should know about this man you've been whispering about. Every head turned, the laughter stopped. David looked confused. So did Isabella. Father Thomas continued, I have known David longer than most of you realize. And I cannot, in good conscience, continue the ceremony without telling you who he truly is. You could hear a pin drop. The guests stared, some leaning forward, others whispering. David's face grew pale. Years ago, the priest said, a young man came to this very church. It was a cold night, pouring rain. I found him sleeping near the steps, drenched, shivering, but too proud to ask for help. That young man was David. Gasps rippled through the pews. Isabella's eyes widened, a hand over her mouth. Father Thomas continued, he had lost both parents. He had nothing. No money, no family, no home. But even then, he refused pity. When I offered him a warm meal, he said, "Father, I'll earn it. Just give me work." A soft murmur spread through the crowd. Shame, disbelief, curiosity. I let him sweep the floors, fix broken benches, tend to the garden. He never complained. Day after day, he came early, worked hard, and left late. One day, I asked him why he worked so tirelessly. He said, "Because someone once told me I'd never make anything of myself. I want to prove them wrong, not with words but with actions." The priest smiled gently at David. That day, I saw something rare, humility with strength. David stood still, his eyes lowered. He hadn't expected this. Father Thomas faced the guests. "And so, before you judge him for what he has or hasn't, remember, this man started from nothing and built himself through sheer will and kindness." The priest wasn't done. "What most of you don't know," he continued, "is that David used the little he earned to help others. He worked fixing cars for single mothers who couldn't pay. He repaired old engines for free for neighbors who needed their vehicles to get to work. He even used his weekends to teach young boys from the streets, giving them the skills to find honest work." Whispers of surprise filled the air. Even Mr. Henderson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Father Thomas took a deep breath. "And 3 years ago, when this very church was about to be closed due to unpaid debts, an anonymous donor stepped forward and cleared every cent owed." The crowd leaned in. That donor, Father Thomas said, was David. There was silence. Pure, heavy silence. All eyes turned to David, who stood frozen, embarrassed, not proud, just quiet. He had never wanted recognition. The priest's voice softened. He didn't tell anyone because he didn't do it for praise. He did it out of love for this community, for the same people who once walked past him when he had nothing. Isabella began to cry. Her father's face fell. Those who mocked now couldn't even lift their eyes. Mr. Henderson stood slowly. The room stiffened. Everyone waited to see what he'd say. He walked toward David, each step deliberate. The crowd held its breath. When he reached the altar, he stopped and looked David in the eye. "Son," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." David blinked, speechless. "I was one of those who doubted you. I thought you came for what my daughter had, but it seems you came bringing something far greater, integrity." He extended his hand. David hesitated, then shook it. Mr. Henderson pulled him into an embrace. Guests filled the hall. Then, applause. Real applause. The kind that comes from the heart. Even the man who had mocked David earlier wiped away a tear. Father Thomas smiled. "Now," he said, "I think we can continue." The mood in the church transformed. Warmth replaced judgment. Love filled every corner. David and Isabella stood facing each other once again. This time, there was no trembling in David's hands, only peace. Father Thomas asked them to exchange rings. As David slid the ring onto Isabella's finger, he spoke softly but clearly. "I never wanted to be anyone's perfect man. I just wanted to be yours. I can't promise we'll have everything, but I promise you'll never face anything alone." Tears streamed down Isabella's face. "And I promise," she whispered, "to remind you every day that love, real love, needs no proof." The priest smiled through moist eyes. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." The crowd rose. Applause echoed through the church. And when Father Thomas said, "You may now kiss the bride," the room erupted into joy. David kissed Isabella softly, the world melting around them. Every whisper that had once mocked them was now replaced with the sound of clapping and laughter, pure, honest happiness. That evening, under the golden glow of chandeliers at the reception, laughter filled the room. Guests who once doubted David now couldn't stop praising him. Mr. Henderson raised a toast. "To my son-in-law," he said proudly, "a man richer than any of us, not in wealth but in heart." People cheered. Isabella smiled at David through tears of joy. Later, Father Thomas found David standing alone on the balcony, looking at the stars. "You handled that with grace," the priest said, placing a hand on his shoulder. David smiled faintly. "I didn't want any of that attention, Father." "I know," said Father Thomas. "But the truth had to be told. You see, sometimes God hides diamonds in dust just to see who will recognize their shine." David chuckled softly. "I didn't do any of this to be seen. I remember what it felt like to be invisible. And I promised myself, if I ever got the chance, I'd make sure others didn't feel that way." The priest nodded, eyes glistening. "And that's exactly why you were chosen for her." As the music played, Isabella walked toward them, her gown blowing in the moonlight. She reached for David's hand, and together they returned to the dance floor. Guests clapped, smiling, moved. Children, the same ones from David's orphan project, ran around, laughing and playing. David had brought them to the wedding so they could feel love too. The camera for your video pans slowly across the room, from the glowing lights to the happy faces, to David and Isabella dancing close, smiling at each other like they'd found heaven right there. And as the priest watches them with quiet pride, the narrator's voice fades in softly. If you love seeing the absolute newest motorhome technology and design, you need to be part of the Review My RV family. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss the next big reveal. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the open road.